Hey, it's James from Marketing for Restaurants here, and welcome to episode 161 of Secret Sauce, the restaurant marketing podcast, Restaurant Trends for 2022.
Some restaurants are quiet, lose money, and the owner works 70 hours a week. Other restaurants are busy, profitable, and the owners work a few hours a day. What's the difference? They have a secret sauce. Join James from Marketing for Restaurants as he helps you come up with your recipe for restaurant success, your secret sauce.
Hey everyone, welcome back to what I think is going to be one of our most popular podcasts for the year, partially because we didn't have that many, but I know our Restaurant Trends podcasts are always very well subscribed. And an indicator of that would be our last episode, which was Managing the Great Resignation in Your Restaurant, has been one of our most popular podcasts as far as downloads goes for a long, long time. A lot of people listening to it. If you haven't listened to it, and if you are seeing a few people leaving, and I think you might be, there's a lot of it going on at the moment, definitely have a listen to this one. It's going to feed into much of the thinking that we have gone into our analysis of what we're expecting our customers around the world to see as we look at the trends for 2022. We do research quite widely for this episode because I think it's important to be able to give restaurant owners a little bit of a heads up about where the market's going to be heading, about what the big trends are going to be. And the approach that we take is that we look at the big macroeconomic effects that are occurring. And it's a little bit difficult to do because we've got customers around the world. But I think that also gives us the strength because some markets will see a trend before other places. So we're often able to pick up on those trends a little bit earlier than other people. So we look at the macroeconomic effects. We then look at the feedback that we're getting from restaurants. What is it that they're seeing that's impacting their restaurant? What is it that they're doing to respond? And how is that working for them? And we put all of that together to come up with the big trends that we think that we're going to see. Now, having said that, there's two things that are really quite interesting, I think. First thing is a lot of similarity between last year and this year as far as those trends go. And on top of that, who really knows? Now, it's interesting. I've been reading some of the blogs and you can tell that some of them are probably sponsored by various categories of foods or food providers. You know, people saying that pork's going to make a big comeback or some random kind of milk. I'm not really sure. And that's not part of our methodology. No one pays us to put these things out. This is really just there for restaurants to have a bit of an idea. But who knows? Because we have seen so much turbulence. If you look at the last 100 years, then obviously you've got the 1919 Spanish flu pandemic, which, you know, a couple of years ago, I never thought I would have referenced that in a restaurant marketing podcast. But to look at the level of turbulence that we've had in the last couple of years, you're really looking at that, which was compounded, of course, with the First World War and then obviously the changes in the Second World War. They're the only other really big impacts that we've seen on the restaurant industry, and I don't think that they are super useful for us. There are some things that we can do, like we know with the Spanish flu, once it died down, things tended to get back to normal moderately quickly. World War I and II did see significant changes in supply chain, and this is another thing that we're going to be talking about. We're going to delve quite deeply into this because I think it is going to drive a lot of the trends. So what we're going to look at is what's happened within the industry. We're going to look at some of the things that are occurring in related industries and those macroeconomic effects, the big moving parts in the economy and how they're going to be impacting your restaurant and what you'll need to be thinking about to maintain, well, let's face it, there's not many people maintaining profitability, returning to as much profitability as possible. Then we're going to be looking at customers because I think that there's some really, really interesting things that are going to be going on with your customers. What we then do is we put together all of those mega trends, all of the feedback that we're getting, and all of the ways that, because don't forget, technology is changing a lot of the way that things are happening as well. So we've got to overlay technological changes as well, even though it is the restaurant industry. And I know a lot of restaurant owners hate putting technology into their restaurant because they don't think that it's got a place. But you know what? I think there's going to be significant pressures driving big uptakes in technology. And then we come up with the trends that we think are going to be important. I want to reference this though, so this podcast has a global audience. We have listeners in about 120 countries. This podcast will have varying amounts of accuracy depending on what country you're in, depending on what state you're in, depending on what side of the street you're in for some areas. So it's really important that when you have a listen to this, make sure that you're referencing this with your customers, the things that are happening in your industry, and as well as those suppliers into your restaurant, because these are the things that, what I'm saying, have a listen, have a think, and then go out and see what's occurring in your restaurant. Because in your local area, there will be variations and combinations of these trends, and getting that bit right, and I think listening to this podcast is really going to help you identify those early, is going to set you up for success when you start to look at increasing your profitability. So first off, what are we seeing within the industry? And I think Blind Freddy could see that there's been a lot of closures. There are a lot of restaurants that have closed the door that are never going to reopen. Now, generally, and this is a huge tragedy for people, because some people see that it's, one failed business and there's lots of businesses that fail. I always think about, when we're talking to a restaurant and we often get a lot of people calling us when it's too late, when they're on their last legs. It's not a small business that fails. It's someone's hopes and dreams that are being kicked into the gutter. And I think that that's a real tragedy. But overall, it's got to be a good thing for the industry because of the fact that profitability was a huge drama for so many restaurants. And the fact that there's now going to be less restaurants out there, that has to be a good thing. However, I don't think that we are anywhere near the end of all of the closures that are going to happen. And that's partially because I'm talking to people who've got some pretty weird and wacky ideas about new restaurants that they're going to open. People who have lost their job in another industry, people who are having a bit of a think about what it is that they want to do with their life and think that it'd be amazingly and awesomely fun to run a restaurant. They're in for a bit of a shock, aren't they? So it is going to be challenging as we see restaurants trying to move back to profitability, trying to bring in some cash to be able to pay down some of the debt that they've taken on to be able to manage to keep their restaurant going. A big one, I think, is that delivery is going to be here to stay, and that's going to be for a couple of reasons. Firstly, we're seeing work from home is in a lot of cities decimating the walk-by traffic that a CBD, a metro-type restaurant could rely on. Those busy lunch trades, in many places, they are not there at all in any way, shape or form, and unlikely to get back to the levels that they were, just because a lot of workers now are looking for increased flexibility. Now, it will be interesting to see how this pans out over the next 12 to 18 months. As I'm recording this, we've got Omicron coming out. Who knows if that's going to be the next round of lockdowns or whether it's going to be the final saving grace. But I think people are looking for flexibility in their jobs. And before Omicron came out, talking to restaurants in Melbourne, in Sydney, and a couple of other places, those people who were relying on busy lunch trades, it's still not back. I think that's going to be an enduring change that is going to be there for the next at least couple of years. It's interesting, in our office, we had a discussion about what we were going to do. We had been bubbling our team, so we had one team coming in on one day, another team coming in on another, so that if we did have a COVID issue, we'd still have half the team available to work in the office. Interestingly enough, when restrictions eased, we said, well, what do you want to do? And we had a bit of a conversation about it. We didn't actually work out. We left it up to the team, gave them that flexibility. Everyone came in. There's a couple of people who work a couple of days from home, but everyone came in. I think that's really important to recognize that nature that people want to belong to something. They want to be with other people in general. Employment is in a really interesting space. In Australia, when we look at it, we're about 400,000 migrants short. That's the number of people who would have come into the country, and we haven't had migrants coming in for a very, very long time. Now, we're also not having tourists coming in, which for some restaurants is creating a massive headache because they relied on that tourist trade. But from an employment side of the house, A lot of migrants would come in, they would work in a restaurant as their first port of call, particularly if language wasn't their, if the English language wasn't their strength. And, they've come from China or they've come from Vietnam or they've come from wherever. They would work in that cuisine type restaurant because they can at least speak to the business owners and the workers in that restaurant. We just haven't seen that. And this is creating massive pressure on restaurants. And we referenced this a bit when we talked about the Great Resignation. You've now got a lot of people who are wondering what the purpose of their life is. Having had a threat, an existential threat like COVID, it's made many people think, is this what I want to be doing? I was looking at an article that someone was working, they were doing some work in the restaurant as they were opening up, and they thought, I've been doing this for 15 years. Is this what I want to be doing for the rest of my life? I need to get out if I'm to be doing something different. This is going to be a really big problem for a lot of restaurants because we don't have the usual flow of university students, immigrants, tourists, backpackers working their way around the world. Many of those sources of traditional employment within a restaurant are gone, and we don't know when they're coming back. So it is very, very competitive to hire staff. It is very competitive to retain staff. And this is creating and this is probably, I think, the biggest trend that is going to drive the influencers next year is people just looking at how they are better going to manage their labour, because without it, you're not going to be able to do anything. Some restaurants are cancelling bookings. Some restaurants are decreasing the number of days that they are open because they physically can't get the staff. And tragically, a lot of restaurant owners are working much longer hours to try and make hay while the sun shines, because there's a lot of people who do want to go out. The other thing that I think is really quite interesting is rent. So there are some people who are changing location because they can make a really big difference in the rent. There are some people who are moving up into a nicer fit out, a nicer location at a cheaper price because of the fact that some landlords are really worried. They're looking at the industry. They're seeing all of the pain that's going through. They know that there's a lot less restaurants out there. They know that people are pretty gun shy when it comes to opening a restaurant as well. So if a restaurant closes down, it might be quite a while before they're able to get someone in. So rentals are dropping in some locations. And I think it's a really good opportunity for you to go to your landlord, even if you're happy, just say, look, what is on the table? Because we want to be profitable. We want to be sustainable. What is there? Because the rent that we were having, it's probably not sustainable. Have a look around, see what deals can be done, and take that to your landlord, and maybe you can get a rental negotiation going. Or maybe you're going to move. Maybe you are going to go to a place where there is good foot traffic that you can take advantage of. Some landlords are really worried about what is going to happen to the economy over the next few years, and that creates an opportunity for all restaurant owners to at least open that dialogue with their landlord. Is there anything that we can do? Or is it time to move? Is it time to shake things up a bit? Take everything that you know about running your current restaurant and put that into something that might be a little bit better, that you can get a better fit out at a lower price. That might be the win-win that you're looking for. Within the wider industry, we're seeing a couple of things that are playing out in the restaurant industry also play out. So employment. Employment in the trucking industry is really quite difficult at the moment. So there are shortages of truck drivers, which is making it difficult for people to get goods supplied. Just a couple of quick stories about supply chain issues that we're starting to see. So the supply of urea, which is a key ingredient in fertilizer. Now, the supply chain issue has come about because a lot of countries are now restricting exports of urea because they're trying to keep the price of fertilizer down, because when the price of fertilizer goes up, it increases the price of farm produce, whether that be from the cattle or the vegetables that are grown using the fertilizer. This has a flow-on effect. Like many of these complex supply chain problems, the flow-on effect is that urea is a key ingredient in AdBlue, which is something that goes into diesel vehicles. Now, The price has gone up significantly. There are now shortages, and potentially trucks are going to be taken off the road because of the inability to source AdBlue. So one shortage leads to increasing costs for logistics, for moving goods around, and also increasing prices for fertilizer, which will flow through to vegetables costing more. Now, the other one that I find really interesting is there was an article that I was reading about a company called Ray's Plum Puddings. Now, I've seen them in the supermarket before. Obviously, I only see them around Christmas time. And, you know, they had a little bit of an old-fashioned kind of design there. I didn't realize it's an 80-year-old business, a family-owned business, making local plum puddings in Victoria. Now, that's a really great story. If you go to their website, it's got a lot more detail about their great and epic history, but I'd never seen that. It wasn't until I read an article in a business newspaper about the supply chain issues that they were having. And the problem that they were having was that the cloth that they wrap their puddings in, they nearly didn't get, which would have meant they wouldn't have been able to cook the puddings. They tried sourcing that cloth from a range of places, but they were unable to. So it was only at the last minute that the cloth came in that they were able to get their plum puddings out. This is another example of the intricate enmeshing of the supply chain that is going to have lots of dramas for lots of restaurants over the next 12 to potentially 24 months. There's a backlog of shipping. This is feeding into anything that is imported, costing more money, and also deliveries becoming increasingly unreliable. All of these tightnesses in the supply chain are going to increase costs. We've already mentioned employment and the fact that in a lot of industries, it's harder and harder to get people, which means that the effectiveness of those industries, whether it be transport, trucking, shipping, whether it's, who is going to get the fruit off the trees. We've had significant issues in Australia with the inability to find people to pick fruit off trees. And so many thousands of tons of fruit have just rotted away for want of someone to pick them. And this is one of the components that we're starting to see significant outbreaks of inflation. United States reported a really high inflation number, and we're starting to see it ticking up in Australia because the governments around the world have been printing money like there's no tomorrow to try and support businesses, try and support the population through the COVID lockdowns and the general effects of the pandemic. That money is now chasing scarcer and scarcer goods, which is pushing the price up through the roof. So we're seeing scarcity, we're seeing lots of cheap money floating around, lots of cheap money floating, chasing scarce goods, pushing the prices up. So these are some of the big macroeconomic effects, and I think that they really highlight how the turbulence going forward over the next 12 months is only going to increase. We thought we were out of it. I don't think we are. I think there's going to be a lot more economic impacts that are going to make everyone's lives just that much more difficult. Lastly, but not least, we've got the effect of the last 18 months of lockdown, pandemic on customers. We're seeing a really interesting bifurcation of the customer market when we see the way that restaurants are responding to this. So some people are really cashed up, and that's because they haven't been able to go overseas, they haven't been able to go out if they've been locked down, they haven't been able to spend their money. And particularly people, and sadly it's particularly white-collar people who've got jobs where they can work from home and haven't been impacted, they've got lots of money to spend. They probably haven't been going out to their local restaurant and buying lunch 2 or 3 times a week. All of that money's been sitting there, it's been accumulating. Now they've got plenty of it. So there is a subset of the market that is very cashed up. There are some people who aren't. Now, a lot of those people will have worked in hospitality because there hasn't been a lot of work over the last 18 months. Anyone who works in the entertainment industry, they've really struggled. Events, tourism, any of the industries that have been impacted by lockdowns, any of the industries where there have been a flow-on effect that has inhibited their ability to work. And we're thinking a lot of the casualisation as well. Many of those casual jobs, they were the first ones to go. Now, if they went 18 months ago, what have those people been living on? They will have been digging into their savings. In Australia, we have superannuation, which is like a 401k plan. People have been able to dig into that to try and keep themselves surviving. But it's been really tough for a huge number of people. I think we're going to see that the middle of the road restaurant where it's at a certain price point offering good food, that is going to really struggle because there aren't that many people in that area anymore. People have all been pushed to one side, either the people with lots of money and they're looking for something special to blow that money on, or they're people who've been really struggling. And when they go out, they're going to be going out for a special occasion. They're going to be looking for value for money. Those economic pressures that are going to be seen by so many of your customers, that is also going to feed into a psychological impact from COVID. As I said earlier, COVID-19 probably, so if you combine World War I and the Spanish flu, along with World War II, COVID-19, probably the top 3 societal catastrophes that have occurred in the last 100 years. And looking at the WHO data, they're reporting 271 million cases and 5 million deaths. Now, the key thing with that is a huge number are underreported. What that means, though, is that there's a lot of people out there who have had COVID. So in Australia, for our Australian listeners, obviously a lot less because we've managed COVID quite well. However, much bigger economic impact than in a lot of other countries because of the huge number of lockdowns. And I think Victoria is the lockdown champions of the world, with Melbourne being locked down for more days than any other capital city in the world, which is nothing to be proud of and certainly quite an experience to live through. But this means that a lot of people they'll have had real experience with people that they know who've had COVID, people in their family, people who've died from COVID. And not only that, all of the fear, uncertainty and doubt from what does the future hold, the economic pressure, fear, are they going to lose their job? Have they lost their job? How are they going to be able to put food on the table? This has had a profound impact on a lot of people. And that psychological impact is going to play into what customers are looking for, what they're going to be wanting to get. And I always come back to this. What is the product that someone is purchasing from you? Because it shouldn't be about the food. You know, here we say where there's experience, there's margin. And food is a low margin product because I could literally go to the supermarket. If you're just going to be selling food, I could go to the supermarket. So the more we understand what our customers have gone through and what it is that they're going to be looking for in 2022, we're going to be able to come up with products that are going to be able to, 1, satisfy more customers, and 2, create a product that they're going to be prepared to pay for, potentially pay good money for, so that we can run profitable restaurants. And that's the key thing that we want to be looking at. So they are the factors that are going to be impacting the industry over the next 12 months and potentially longer. So let's have a look at how that is going to, what are the actual trends that we're going to see in restaurants? So first up is a change in the way that labour management is conducted. And I think this is going to be probably the biggest thing that we're going to see. And it's going to impact restaurants in a lot of different ways. We went out to a restaurant on the weekend and it was interesting. I was expecting traditional table service but no, they'd gone to ordering at the counter and the meal will be brought out to you because what we're seeing is a huge inability to source the labour that is required to run a restaurant. So restaurant owners around the world are looking at anything that they can do to increase the number of people that they need on a shift, whilst maximising the revenue that's coming in because there simply aren't the people there. And we're seeing lots of interesting stories. So in Sydney, there was one restaurant that's paying $90 an hour on the weekend for dishwashers. That is pretty expensive. We're seeing other restaurants that are cancelling bookings because they don't have the people to be able to do it. And they're either closing on certain days or they're decreasing the number of tables that they're going to do because whether it's front of house, back of house, there just aren't the people there that are needed to be able to get the product out the door. I took the family out 2 weeks ago up into Melbourne and we were wandering around. We found a nice area with a whole series of restaurants. We'd eaten there on numerous occasions. A good cheap eats kind of place, lots of choices, which is good for a family because there's four of us, we can never decide on one, so it's good to be able to have choices. And we went there and I was shocked because there was only, out of probably 12 venues, there was only 2 open. And that was because it was Sunday. The penalty rates are really high and they were just... Now, some of those restaurants have probably closed and aren't going to reopen because of the impact of COVID. But some of them are closing just because Sunday is a very difficult day. We have quite high penalty rates, particularly on a Sunday in Australia. So some places are choosing not to be open on a Sunday because they can't make the money, and they can redeploy the staff from that Sunday through the days when they can actually make money, so that they'll have a decent team out to be able to run the restaurant and take some of the pressure off. Because what we're also seeing is that restaurants where staff are worked really, really hard because they're understaffed, they're losing staff, and that's only compounding the issue. So restaurants may not be open for as many hours as they were prior to COVID. And that's going to create a lot of issues around profitability, because remember, the number of hours that you're open, that's the number of hours that you've got to be able to spread all of your fixed costs. So you're paying your lease 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all of the days in a month. Now, let's just have a quick look at the numbers. If you were running the kind of restaurant that was open 7 days a week and you're not going to be open on a Sunday, that means that your fixed costs are going to increase 14%, because that's one day that you're not going to be trading. You're not going to be getting any revenue in to offset things like your lease, your insurances, all of those fixed costs. So those fixed costs now increase 14%. Ouch. Not only that, we're finding that people are really struggling to get the skills that they need in the kitchen. So a lot of restaurants are moving to a simpler menu. And that's for 2 reasons. One, they don't want to, any of those dishes that took a lot of time to be able to work on, cut them. Because of the fact that there's not that much labor there, and the labor that you do have in the kitchen probably isn't going to be as skilled as it could be. Anything that's complicated, anything that takes time, you're going to have to cut them, because this is really going to be about throughput and maximum throughput with limited labor, because labor is going to be the limiting factor that you've got. So we'll see simpler menus, simpler items on those simpler menus, dishes that are easier to prep, quicker to prep, so that one person will be able to increase the number of mains that they would normally be able to get out the door in an hour. And they're the kind of metrics that you want to be thinking about. And of course, you want to bring this back to basics and remember the old Boston consulting matrix, the dogs, the puzzles, the stars, the plough horses. Have a think about which of those items there should be no dogs on the menu. And even if it's a star, think about how much time it is to get out. And would you be better off selling 2 plough horses for 1 star if there's that time difference? We're going to be looking at a lot more automation, and whether that's kitchen automation, front of house automation, or ordering from the table with QR codes. And this is something that we're working on. We've spent quite a bit of time and effort looking at what's made Frollo great and looking at what Restolo, why people are using that, what features that they want to have in there, and how hard would that be to put into a QR code scanning solution that's going to put the technology back in the hands of the restaurants without the hideous price tag. So I think there's going to be a lot more people getting onto that, because it means that people are going to be able to decrease the amount of labor cost. And we'll see this also. Now, before COVID, there was a bit of talk about, robots flipping burgers and the smart ovens. Lots of tools there that can decrease the amount of time that is spent in preparing a meal. And I think that we're on the cusp of seeing this become relatively mainstream as people experiment with ways that they can cut that labor component out. I think we're also going to probably see the death of the shouty kitchen. The kitchen where everyone's under pressure, everyone's stressed out trying to get the food out the door. I think, and for a couple of reasons. One, the labor market is really tight. So if someone's working in one of those kitchens, they can probably go to somewhere where the pace isn't quite as high and the teamwork is a lot more collaborative rather than aggressive. And they may even be able to do that and get more money. And it's interesting. So at the bottom end, my son was working at McDonald's. He was literally flipping burgers with McDonald's. He's got a new job at a family-owned restaurant. The thing that I found really interesting was he left McDonald's. We were excited that he had a job at McDonald's as parents because of the fact that, we know that's going to instill discipline and ability to follow procedures. And if you can survive at McDonald's, then, it means that you're pretty good. And as employers, we like to see McDonald's on a resume because, we think it represents a quality person with a bit of resilience and a bit of ability to work in a moderately high pressure environment. He left there. Now he sent his resume to this other restaurant, and literally they went through and they just checked his resume and they said, yep, you got the job, which that's not best practice hiring by any stretch of the imagination, but much more reflective of the difficulty that they've got in finding people to do the job. He had his first shift and I said, so, well, you've got to remember this is probably your job interview because they didn't actually really ask you any questions. They're going to see if you can actually do the job. And he came back and, we were really keen to see how his first shift was. And he said, oh, it was really good. Yeah, they were a lot more friendly. Everyone was friendly. No one shouted at me. And the best bit was he was really stoked because they gave him a coffee for free at the end of his shift. And he's 17. He likes that kind of thing. But from his point of view, the move from McDonald's to this new restaurant has been really, really a great move for him. And on top of that, he's earning a couple of bucks an hour extra. So one thing that restaurant owners are really going to have to do is they're going to have to be putting some time and effort into building a strong culture within the restaurant. And I think that's always been important because it really reflects in the product that you put out, whether it's the smile on the face of front of house, whether it's the quality of the food that's coming out the door. Building that culture that's going to be collaborative, team-focused, somewhere where people want to work. We'll leave it there. We'll come back next week with the second part of our restaurant trends for 2022. We're going to be looking at some of the supply chain issues that people are going to be having. We're going to look at some of the profitability trends that are going to be driven by the changes in the economic space that we're seeing in the restaurant industry. If you've got anything out of this episode, either send us some feedback on LinkedIn or Facebook. We really like getting that, whether it's good, bad, or otherwise. If there's a topic that you'd like us to cover, then definitely reach out to us. We get a lot of our topic ideas from that. We get it from either the customers that we're working with, the things that are topical with them, or a restaurant from somewhere around the world will reach out to us and say, hey, how do we manage this? What do you think about that? So happy to take any feedback, good, bad, or indifferent. And but if you did get something out of it, please share it on socials, or word of mouth is even better. Let other restaurants out there know. That's about it. Have a glorious day. Bye.
Want more customers for your restaurant, cafe, or takeout? Every month, our marketing tools and information are used by thousands of restaurant owners just like you to help them find more customers and turn them into repeat customers. All of our tools and information is designed specifically for restaurant owners. We know you don't have a lot of time to spend marketing or learning complicated procedures, so our tools are quick and easy to use. If you're looking to increase your revenue and profits or want to work less hours, check out marketingforrestaurants.com.